Senator Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I've been listening, Mr Joyce, carefully to your evidence to this committee, and what's become clear is it wasn't the grounding of the fleet that was central to your plan, but it was the lockout, which then required the grounding to take place. Yet you've told the committee that you've been in, we know, in extensive contact with members of parliament from the Prime Minister down, including members of the opposition, although no approach was, as far as I'm aware, made to the Greens. But you had...
Sorry, Senator, that's not true. I did meet with one of your member of parliament.
Okay. But the evidence before this committee is that you set out in at least the week before the grounding of the fleet to deceive the government and this parliament by withholding your plan to create a lockout. That's true, isn't it?
No, it isn't, Senator. What we did is made very clear the position that the company was in, and it's in the Act, the Fair Work Australia Act, that the company has the alternative as its course of industrial actions to take a lockout. So we made it very clear.
You knew that, didn't you?
We knew that was always an option, but everybody knows it's always an option because it is part of the Act.
But you said you've told this committee that you hadn't talked to any party about the lockout before that Saturday.
We hadn't talked to any party about the lockout. We hadn't talked to any party about a whole series of stuff. But we had. But Senator, can I answer? We had talked to all of the parties about the position that the company was in. We talked to all of the parties about the operational, commercial and safety issues that we were facing, and we talked to all of the parties about the likelihood of us having to grounding the fleet at late notice, and that was discussed with all parties.
Yes, but you've made it clear to this committee, Mr Joyce,
yes,
that the core of your plan was a lockout, which then necessitated the grounding. But you spoke to the Prime Minister, the Minister for Transport, their opposition numbers, about the grounding, but you deceived them by not saying you were aiming at a lockout, didn't you?
I don't agree with that, Senator. Everybody knows the clauses in the Fair Work Australia Act. Everybody knows that the company has the ability to do a lockout. It's the only industrial relations activity that we can.
But you've told this committee, Mr Joyce, that you've told this committee,
Senator,
Mr Joyce, you've told this committee...
Hang on, Senator Brown, sorry, I was just talking to Senator Xenophon. Sorry, is there a point of order, Senator?
Yes, if Mr Joyce could finish his answer before Senator Brown rudely, asks his next question and not rudely interrupt.
I would encourage allowing Mr Joyce to finish his question. Senator Brown, you have the call. Mr Joyce.
Yes, so Senator, it was very clear, as I keep on saying, that the position that we had was that we explained all of the issues that the airline's facing. We expressed our views on the further deteriorations that are going to take place and the grounding could take place. Now, you know, I have to say that it is very clear to everybody on the Fair Work Australia Act, which is the act we're working in, that the only way that the management could actually handle once you've made the decision of how we bring this to a close was to take the action of a lockout. That resulted in the airline being grounded. And absolutely is the case. It was the case. We were focused all the way through those weeks in us negotiating an outcome with the unions. We had continuously been involved with the unions in conciliation. Lockout was only one option that was available to us. We actually had dialogue even in the hours up to the AGM with some of the unions about what would occur. So that was our prime focus. That's what we were trying to do. And it's only when we got to a position where we knew that the unions were going to escalate the dispute, we knew that the action was unacceptable to the continued operation of the company, that we made the lockout decision. Yeah. And when the lockout decision was made, then the fleet was grounded.
Yes, but you've told the committee that you were well aware that the government could use Section 431 to prevent a lockout. And you went about deliberately withholding your plan for a lockout from the Prime Minister of this country and the Minister for Transport because you didn't want that section to be used. That's true, isn't it?
No, that's not true. That's not true, Senator. We were in a position where we knew what our alternatives on the Fair Work were. I think the government knew what they could do in terms of intervention, and that was up to the government to decide what it was going to do.
Why did you not raise your central plan of a lockout with the Minister for Transport or the Prime Minister in the days leading up to last Saturday?
Because we only made that decision on the Saturday, and once I made that decision, we told the ministers, and we formed the Prime Minister's office once that decision was made.
But
no decision was made because our prime focus was on negotiating with the unions and trying to get it resolved. When the decision was made, we informed the people.
But on your own evidence, you're not credible on that matter, Mr Joyce, because you've told the committee that you spoke with presumably the Prime Minister and the Minister for Transport about grounding the fleet.
We did.
But your aim in grounding the fleet was a lockout.
The result of what happened on the weekend was the lockout resulted in the grounding of the fleet. But I have to say, you know, in the dialogue about locking out, it doesn't take much to realise that as a consequence of that, as part of that, we would be locking out people. Because the issue was, how do we bring it to a close? And the issue was, as a consequence of the action that took place, what did we do? So the only alternative that we had was to take the decision under Fair Work Australia to do the lockout, and then the fleet was grounded. But it's very clear for anybody that understands the clauses in Fair Work Australia, for anybody that understands the operation of the airline, that the lockout and, as a consequence of the grounding, go hand in hand. They go together.
So when you negotiated, or when you spoke with the Prime Minister, the Minister for Transport, or their opposite numbers, and presumably repeatedly talked about grounding the fleet, but not about a lockout, which was the central plank of your plan, as it turned out, you expected that the people you were talking to in this Parliament should work out that your real plan was a lockout, even though you weren't using that term and you weren't pointing to that outcome.
Senator, we were very clear in where we were as an airline. We were very clear that we were working through the negotiations with the individuals, unions, to try and get it resolved. We were very clear that the current situation, which was a death by 1,000 cuts, could not be sustainable. We were very clear that we had three alternatives to us. We had the alternative of conceding to the demands which would endanger the future of the airline. We were very clear that the other alternative was that we continue to die to 1,000 cuts. We were very clear with all parties that that couldn't continue. We were very clear that this could get to a grounding of the airline. Now, I can't be any clearer than that in terms of our intentions.
So you were very clear about everything, but you're very obscure and devious about the fact that you're aiming at a lockout.
Sorry, Senator, I think that's absolutely inappropriate to say. We were very clear on our approach all the way through.
But I'm afraid I have to take you to task on this and to ask you to explain the behaviour which led to you misleading, and I say that as a result of your own evidence, Mr Joyce, this government and this Parliament, about your central plan to lock out your workers, which would then necessitate the grounding of the fleet, because you spoke repeatedly about potentially grounding the fleet, but you never once conveyed your real plan, which was the lockout. Now, how can you be believed when that's the pattern of information transfer you give to ministers of the Crown?
Can I say, Senator, and to make it very clear, the lockout wasn't our plan all along, so you're incorrect on that.
You said you were talking about it for weeks.
We're talking about the grounding of the airline for weeks. You
told the committee that.
But yes, I did, and I said very clearly, I said that there was talk about the grounding of the airline for weeks. But there's various different ways the airline could be grounded. And there was lots of different alternatives in which it could have happened. And I'll go through a range of them, Senator, because because I think that's important. First of all, the airline could have been grounded because the engineers or the unions fulfilled their notice, their intentions of taking 48 hours or 72 hours notice.
Yes,
if that occurred, sorry, Senator, can I finish?
Yes, you can.
Senator Brown, I would urge you once again just to let Mr Joyce finish. If the question is long-winded and I think that it's not getting to the point of your question, I will certainly raise it with Mr Joyce.
And I think I answered the Senator's questions in relation to how the airline could be grounded and why lockout was only one of the ways in that could have occurred. Because there was the alternative that the airline could have been grounded because of the union action, and that would have resulted in the airline having to be grounded for the same period. There's the potential that because of increased safety concerns, that CASA could have continued, and they gave us that warning, could have grounded the airline because of the action that was taking place. There was the potential that the deterioration of the operation over periods of time would have resulted in the grounding of the airline, and there was the potential that a lockout would result in the grounding of the airline. So there was a range of them. I mentioned CASA, so CASA
Yes,
would have
but the
grounded.
difference in all those proposals that were alternatives that you put up there and the one that was used, which is the lockout, is that you alone made the decision that there was going to be a lockout. You've told the committee that. You've told us that it was a potential in the air for weeks. It was evolving in your mind, but you didn't tell the government or the Prime Minister of this country that that was an impending a plan that you were going to put into action, did you?
As I kept on saying, Senator, we worked through our process through those weeks of negotiating with the unions. We had hundreds of meetings with the unions in order for us to get a negotiated settlement. Lockout was the last resort, and I've always said it was the last resort about where we would get to. It was the last resort for the organisation. We had 35 meetings with the pilots, 35 meetings with the lamies. We had lots of meetings in Fair Work Australia. And we were worried about the performance and the reasons why the airline could be grounded for a range of reasons, and that's what we'd communicated. You're right, I didn't go through the potential of the lockout. I didn't go through in detail the potential or at all about CASA grounding. I didn't go through the unions grounding it. They were all possibilities. They were all possibilities, and I think everybody that was involved in the dialogue would have known they were all possibilities, and they would have known that each of those could have been the reason why the airline could have been grounded.
Well, we're talking to the unions and to CASA later, Mr Joyce, but we're talking to here about your option. And you had a big stick behind your back and you didn't show it to anybody. And the reason, I put this to you as a question, the reason you didn't show that is because you didn't want the government to intervene and prevent the lockout you were planning. That's true, isn't it?
No, it's not, Senator. We are in a position where Fair Work Australia gives us the ability to take industrial action as well. There has to be balance between a company and its employees. There's nobody complaining about the massive industrial action that took place with the unions over an extended period that was putting at risk the 35,000 people, death by 1,000 cuts, was going to result in thousands, had resulted in 70,000 passengers disrupted, and it was going to last another year. Nobody was complaining over that action. That was killing Qantas. I had to do something. I did take a significant decision, I know, in having to do the lockout. I did it because it was the only way to bring this to an end. And it is very clear in Fair Work Australia that the employer has that ability. So it's not a big stick hidden behind your back. It's actually there for everybody to see and everybody to know. It is in the legislation. It's built into legislation for employers to be able to defend themselves, do the right thing, and to bring this to a head, which it was brought to, and brought security and certainty to all of our customers, to all of our employees and to our shareholders going forward. That's what this had to do, and it was the only alternative that was left with me.
If you had told, just one more question on that, if I may, Chair.
Thank you.
If you had told the government that you planned a lockout, you knew that the government could thwart that plan by invoking Section 431, didn't you?
No, again, your premise is completely wrong of the question, Senator. We did this because we had only one viable alternative under Fair Work Australia to respond to the union action, which is the lockout. That is the only action, viable action that we had that we could actually do. We took that action and then the lockout. It was up to the government to decide what they needed to do. The risk assessment was very clear. The grounding of the airline happened because we could not continue the operation of the airline until the lockout happened. That's clear. They're the facts. They're the truth.
I think it's probably worth stating.
With Mr Buchanan, if I may, I have a letter here, Mr Buchanan, dated Wednesday the 20th.
Sorry, Senator.
I just want to ask him if it's valid.
But
That's
Mr
all.
Buchanan was going to answer very briefly, and then we'll come back to you, Senator Brown, and Senator Ludlam has a couple, but I'm going to go to Senator Cameron because I'm not going to get belted up.
Okay.
Once Qantas leaves, Senator Cameron hasn't had a chance to ask questions.
I was just going to say it's worth stepping back, I think, a little bit and say what's the broader challenge here for the aviation industry. I know the issues of last Saturday and Monday are pertinent and obviously politically getting a lot of discussion, but this is an airline that's losing a lot of money. And if you look around the world, what are the options what would have happened to Qantas over the long run? And you see a series of airlines have either disappeared, and this is a very tough competitive industry, and lots of airlines have disappeared, or airlines use bankruptcy, and lots of our US airlines go into bankruptcy, or we've seen airlines get bailed out by government, like Japan Airlines recently, Air New Zealand not too long ago. And they're the options, I think, would have presented this committee and this government if management hadn't acted.